Also rendering a similar UI control, but this time asking for the type of residence, the type of structure itself, as part of this policy. Let's say that this is a additional prompt that I want to add into this dynamic form. So you didn't see this particular dynamic form prompt before. We're adding this second one in. So let's say, depending on the not just the coverage type, but the residence type, that will influence what the final outcome will be of this policy. But we need to constrain the list of options again, like we're going to do for that base coverage, for the different denominations depending on the coverage amount, and similarly different options for the residence type. So I'm creating these two different UI controls, and to think about how we're going to assign the drop-down options for these, think about the fact that we are creating the exact same, as far as Corticon can tell, the exact same entity. We're creating two of the entity that is called option. We're creating two of the entities that are called UI controls within the context of one container, within the context of one entity called UI. We want to differentiate between two different UI controls that are of the same type, both multiple choices, have distinct labels, distinct field names, but in particular, what we'll hone in on here is to isolate what this actual ID is saying. Let's think of the ID as the way to distinguish between the UI control for base coverage and the UI control for residence type. Now, when I go back to the rule flow, we'll go into the second rule sheet at this stage. Again, we're at stage number 1. This is set as a precondition. Going into the coverages dropdown, we'll see how I have different options pre-populated for first the level of coverage depending on dwelling, liability, personal property, as well as for the options of structure type of this particular residence. Now, if I leave it as is, leave everything as is within this rule sheet, you can see how Corticon's not going to know and not going to be able to communicate to the front end any distinction between the first drop-down of the coverage level and the second one of the structure type. So how are we going to resolve this? Well, this is where filters that are not being used as a filter in the traditional sense of filtering out data, that's how, the typical way we might use filters within Corticon. But we're actually going the reverse direction of instead of having a precondition and really making sure the least amount of unnecessary data passes through, we're going to eliminate the idea of filtering out any data for this particular use case of implementing these drop-downs. We're basically going to use instead the filters for the purpose of distinguishing between the two different types of UI controls, or the two different distinct UI controls of the same type, rather. So back in the preceding rule sheet, this coverages.ers, you'll recall that I created those two different IDs. One is base coverage, one is residence type.